It's happening to you again. This is Idiots versus Idiots. You are listening to a podcast about business and marketplace news. The big man gets really all up in arms if I don't say business and marketplace news. He's very particular.
It's happening to you again. What are we, torture? Is it torturous? Is this show torture? Is that what it is? It's happening to you again, folks. You've done it to yourself. You've made us, quasi-popular. Can I say quasi-popular?
Live from Guantanamo Bay.
So you've definitely done it to yourself. That's all I'm saying.
So and our first story is great because I can really relate. The CEO of Citi,
CITI, like Citibank.
Yeah, and they're just Citi now. Says that there's something called Zoom fatigue. This podcast is recorded over Zoom, and I'm always fatigued by doing it.
So, okay,
it sucks out my life force. It's like I've joined a cult.
So if you've watched this podcast before, you know how this mostly works, right? For the most part, Danny decides the shows. He sends me links to some of the articles about the shows, and then I do a little bit more research because I can't count on Danny to do any. So what
that
I
is
find
an unfair characterization.
What I find funny about today's journalism is journalism used to be this art form, right? When you would read the newspaper or whatever, it was done in proper grammar, it was capitalized properly. And look, and again, I'm not a grammar Nazi. I hate grammar. I do. I'm not good at it or whatever.
He's from Texas. What are you expecting?
My point though is the headline of this article reads, right. Citi might have no Zoom Fridays because WFH isn't all roses. Okay. Now here's the point.
Well, no, that's the headline. That's the headline I put in our document. The headline of the actual article is Citi CEO institutes Zoom-free Fridays, encourages vacations to combat virus-related fatigue.
Okay,
from the
but
all-day
here's
work
the point.
Day.
The point I have is there was a couple of, because I looked this up, there were several articles that said Citi might have no Zoom Fridays, and then the very first sentence of the article is Chief Executive has banned Zoom calls on Fridays. It's an immediate, this is my issue with headlines, and here's my point, is we now live, and it's one of the reasons I like doing the show, is we now live in a headline-driven marketplace, right?
Yes.
We scroll through, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever, and we read the first sentence, the headline of that article,
and
think we know what it is.
Right, it's all clickbait, yeah.
And it can be 100% misleading. But now, in this case, we're talking about, what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that, and look, Zoom fatigue, is this a real thing? I actually looked up some, has there been any studies? Because we've heard this is a new term. You've got to love the English language. We make up crap all the time. Zoom fatigue, right? And according to the Psychiatric Times, it turns out that...
Oh, that's a credible source. Look at you.
Yeah, Psychiatric Times, according to them, they're not embracing that there is anything like Zoom fatigue. They're making the argument that if there is, what they think might be causing it, and this kind of makes sense. It essentially says it turns out that the millisecond delay between the virtual verbal responses negatively affect our interpersonal perception and distrust. So if we're talking to somebody in person and I ask you a question and you think about it, I can get that. It's psychological clues that, all right, you're about to lie to me, right? You hesitated. We obviously we now looking at a world where, everything is a hesitation because it takes a certain amount of time for it to go back and forth and that kind of stuff.
Lags.
So I can see it, right, from a distrust standpoint, but is that really Zoom fatigue, or were we always sitting in too many meetings to begin with?
Yeah, so I'm 100% about meeting fatigue. We're going to die by doing meetings. So, the biggest thing for me was when I went from being a full-time entrepreneur, which is just a code word for being broke, to working in an office, which is just a code word for I finally had health insurance.
Speaking the American language right there.
Which is all of what I'm saying is entirely facetious because I've always purchased my own health insurance. The one time I did go work in an office, I didn't get health insurance from them. So
nobody cares, Danny. You don't have to stick up for yourself. You don't have to backtrack. Nobody cares.
The biggest pain point I had going to that office was sitting in meetings. They were useless. I didn't care, and I happened to work in an office that was, I was a project manager, but my cohorts were all women. That's fine. But the point where it was irritating for me was I would go sit in meetings and they're talking about some show where it's like it was a Netflix show about cheerleaders. I'm like, I can't I can't even admit to having watched the show without seeming pervy, and I didn't watch the show because I don't care. So there's no way for me to engage in this dialogue. I'm either out of the contextual loop and therefore out of the group, or I'm a perv for having watched the show about high school cheerleaders. So there was no, but that was just my personal beef. But
right. Well, yeah. But look, I don't know that Zoom fatigue is a thing. People have always talked about there's endless jokes made about meetings and corporations and big business and right. And like middle management makes it, are you bored? Do you not have anything to do? Are you feeling lonely? Call a meeting, right? Yeah. Look, middle management meetings, this is what they do, whatever.
I forget what publication. Sorry to interrupt you because whatever you were saying was killing me very slowly. I forget what publication it was from, but a guy took a set of pre-recorded responses and inserted them into a meeting and just didn't go to the meetings. And it was
just make noises.
Well, yeah. So like, it was for it was for some sort of journalistic publication in quotes, and he did it as a project where he's like, okay, now he's going to reveal to everybody that this whole time I've been. For 1 week straight, I just sent you pre-recorded responses to things, and I had my camera off and I was doing other things. I'll try to find that and link it in the description if I care or bother or recall to do so. But I and thankfully, my last office job, I had a lot of conference calls.
Right. And the same thing. Conference calls were Zoom meetings before, right? Like,
and as best as I can surmise, it's a particular kind of hell, right?
I despise them. I always despise them in corporate America.
I despise doing a podcast over Zoom. The biggest reason, like,
he doesn't. He's a complainer. He's an old, he's an old man complainer. I despise doing them over Zoom. Anything that's supposed to be the better.
I am a young, optimistic, hopeful person. Okay?
Lies. He's lying to you, folks. He is lying to you, folks. Go ahead. Okay.
Well, so I'm just saying, I thought it was interesting that, and there's one line in here that I think is the more pertinent line than Zoom Free Fridays, and I'm going to quote it directly, that the CEO is banning Zoom calls on Friday and is urging employees to take vacation in order to combat the relentlessness of the pandemic workday.
Right.
Since the beginning of Dos Equis, and now that there's a large swath of workers, I think it's something like 30% of workers in America are going to now be work from home people and partial office attenders, that there is now a relentlessness to their workday, where which to surmise is to say, or to, whatever, is basically that people are now just working all the time. And that's an interesting... We
talked about that previously.
Yeah,
right?
But I think here's what I do think is actually not happening. Here's what I think is happening is that people are not working all day. They're just working in bursts, right?
Well, productivity is definitely up. We talked about it in the Is the 9 to 5 Dead, right? Or whatever. Yeah. People are working probably when their kids are asleep instead of being forced to work when their kids are awake or whatever. They're being more productive. My question with this kind of story is always, why does the CEO of Citi care about what's going on right now? Like, why? Like, when they come out with a statement like this, they're not just sitting at home going, oh, how does my hundreds of thousands of employees feel about their Zoom meetings? Like, what's being driven? Is there some kind of big lawsuit out there right now about how people are working too many hours?
Is there a pending, was there a potential litigation
Absolutely. You know, where they're being, you know what I mean? Where they're being forced to say something, get out in front of something.
Of course we're speculating. Of course we're speculating. This is idiots versus idiots.
But when a big CEO comes out and says, y'all are working too hard, everybody needs to take Fridays. Oh, by the way, and here's the deal. We want you to not have Zooms on Friday unless you're dealing with customers that require it, right? Like, so Zoom-free Fridays, but not if you have clients that need to talk to you on Friday. So not everybody gets out. They are designating May 28th as a firm-wide holiday for a city reset day. So they're giving everybody the day off on May 28th, right? Now, here's one part I thought was really funny of one of the stories that I picked out. It says this comes out one day prior to Goldman Sachs chief executive officer telling employees in a voice memo that he would further enforce its Saturday rule, barring employees from working from 9 p.m. Friday to 9 a.m. Sunday, which is essentially the Sabbath, right? Now, not that they're calling it that, and I don't know if it has anything to do with religion, but, you know, so Goldman Sachs encourages their employees, apparently, to not work from Friday night to Sunday morning. Now, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, again, how does that happen? Like, what caused any company?
Yeah, it's all so perplexing, but there could have been, and, you know, this is something we probably talked about before, is like, you know, when we talk about Twitter or something else, sometimes CEOs could be, you know, they're generally disconnected perhaps from the day-to-day operations of their business.
Absolutely.
Because their thinking is mostly focused on driving the vision for growth or whatever. That being said, I think they're starting to see that, like, whoa, my middle management is really crunching down on workers to push productivity because of middle management. How do you move up when you're a middle manager? You got to push and force down on your underlings.
It's all stat driven, right?
Yeah,
because it's not performance driven, because the performance is done by the employees, right?
Exactly.
So it's stat driven of those employees.
Exactly. Right? So that putting that into that context helps you understand that perhaps they're going, listen, you can't drive our workers this hard because they're going to burn out and leave. And that is, you know, that's possibly what's going on here.
Well, employee retention, I will say this about corporations in, let's say, the last decade. They seem to have finally, after decades of bad thinking, figured out that employee retention is much better than hiring someone to replace you constantly. That employee education is much more expensive. It is way better for the company. It's way better for performance. It's way better for customer satisfaction to retain employees. Now, I'm not saying that they've done everything that they could do as far as annual raises and benefits and things like that they could, because it is still statistically the best way to get a raise is to change jobs. Like, that is still, in today's world, the best way to get a raise. So they haven't figured it out from a monetary standpoint, but they've done other things to try and retain employees.
So I used to live in one of America's bigger cities for finance, which is the Minneapolis-St. Paul general area. Two huge banks are headquarters out of there, U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo. And I know guys who would go from one bank to the other, and they're climbing the social ladder like this.
Exactly.
They're crisscrossing. They go spend 2 years at one, they go to the other place to get a raise. It's just too hard to bump up. But then they go, oh, this is our competitor. So you'd see guys crisscrossing. I've done it myself. I worked for both of the organizations. One is better than the other. I'm not going to say which one, but it's U.S. Bank. But it's fascinating.
Well, you could make the argument you shouldn't have to do that, right? Your company knows how good you are at your job. You should not. Yeah, you're right. Should not have to do that.
I mean,
but it is what it is.
They don't have to hire you. They hired you for a specific job. They don't have to promote you. They don't have to do that. So,
well, and of course they came out because, Citi is a publicly traded company, so they had to add in the needing the rest is not a sign of weakness. And everyone is feeling the wariness. It doesn't mean anything. We're not weak. We don't need this time, but we're going to take it, right? Like, I love how they always balance these statements. You know what I mean? Like,
well, listen,
take the time off because you need it. But all you stockholders out there, we're not tired. We're going to be fine.
But on a more personal note, listen, I think that if you want to get, there's this thing in business, like in entrepreneurship, this hustle culture. Like, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. I'm going to go to bed at 2 a.m. But the point is, my friend, you're going to get diminishing returns. The quality of your product. If I'm a more of it's not laziness. I understand that the body, the mind, the soul, everything needs rest. You have to shut it off for a while. You need a little bit of leisure in your life. That doesn't mean and I hate the phrase self-care because, I'm not a blonde woman trying to pitch vitamins on Instagram by using my butt.
But we should have a big man vitamin coming out soon. But anyway, go ahead.
But I'm just saying that, there is an argument to be made that for centuries humanity have observed some sort of, usually in a religious context, period of rest that is good for you. And that hustle mentality of I'm going to go, and I'm still that person, right? But at some point I realized I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just keeping myself busy. And for me, it's been, on a personal note, it has been more like I have to just remove the guilt of I just need this time to relax. I had a surgery last year. It was kind of I wouldn't use the word traumatic, but it was a rough go. And afterwards, they're like, you need a minimum 6 weeks recovery period. So I was like, okay, for 6 weeks, I'm not going to do anything. Right?
Yeah. I think it boils down to you, right? I have people that work with me that they are what I would put in that category of a hustler, in that they work 24/7. And that particular person that I'm thinking about, I couldn't see them succeeding in any other way. It's their personality type. I believe more like you that, look, I need actually more balance the other way. If you want me to be the most productive I can be, I need to have more time with my wife and kids, more time with doing other things, so that
I need time away from my family in order to be productive.
But this is where I get into, from even a business and entrepreneur standpoint, I think it's very self-reflective. This whole buy a business book and do exactly what that business book to succeed is bullshit, right? It's bullshit. Because it may not apply to you and your personality type or your structure in life.
And so, if you are, and we're just going to close out with these thoughts here, but if you are just entering the world of entrepreneurship, personal finance, or any of these things, I used to say this quote all the time when I was a trainer in the, network marketing kind of industry. You can walk into, at that time, you could walk into a bookstore and you can go look at the personal finance section, the entrepreneurship or business section, and there are dozens, if not, tens of dozens, hundreds of books on how to succeed in every single one, in whatever avenue, whether it's personal finance or Kiyosaki says go accrue a bunch of debt. Dave Ramsey says don't take a single penny of debt, pay off your debt.
Yeah.
And the point is, both of them are wealthy men, right?
Absolutely.
And so, ostensibly Kiyosaki, and both of them by telling people what to do with their money, but nonetheless, they are wealthy. So there is before you go on that journey of personal finance or entrepreneurship or trying to build wealth, you have to take a moment to ask yourself, who am I? What motivates me? What activates me?
Absolutely.
What gets me moving? Because that's a question that you have to ask. You have to answer that question first. Because I love Robert Kiyosaki. He adds so much value to my journey as an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But I am a debt-averse person. And it took a little bit of time for me to understand I'm a personal debt-averse person. I am happier renting an apartment rather than putting a down payment down on a house and carrying a 30 or 15-year note.
Which is completely stupid to me, by the way. I'm the direct opposite of that. But again, we both can be right to our personal financial situation.
Exactly. But not afraid of taking on debt to buy an income-producing asset.
Right.
That to me is logical, right?
Right.
Going out leasing a car. Dave Ramsey would poison your lunch if you went and leased the car. But I think there's times in which that is a logical decision to having a vehicle. Not
Absolutely.
Always logical. It's not always logical. It depends on the payment, depends on the car, depends on the terms, depends on why you're leasing it. But I'm saying I'm a person who is generally debt averse, who goes, there's a lot of logic to a lot of this stuff because it's a numbers game, and if you understand how the numbers are moving, you can benefit from debt in a particular way. That is all to say.
And to wrap this back real quick before we move on, this whole press release, this whole several articles written about it is 100, in my opinion, meaningless. It's an ad thing. The people that need to work on Fridays are still going to work on Fridays.
They're still going to have Zoom Fridays, you know.
They're still but they're still going to have meetings. If anybody feel there's nothing in here saying they're changing their policies and procedures of work. If a manager still needs or feels that they need to call a Zoom meeting on Friday, they're going to call it. There's nothing. This is one of those fluff pieces where, hey, that sounds like a great idea that says we're for our employees, so let's put it out there that we're doing this, but it's not going to affect anybody that this is what they do.
It's called earned media.
Right.
The CEO said it. There 15 or 20 articles went out that they didn't have to work to get. And now the biggest and fastest growing business and marketplace news podcast, Idiots versus Idiots, is now talking about it. It's all buzz, baby.
There you go. All right.
Well, I want to tell you about something. I'm not sure if you know this about Idiots versus Idiots. We are death peddlers. That is right. We peddle the death of plastic pollution. Not only does Liquid Death murder your thirst, 10% of every can sold goes to end plastic pollution. And frankly, my friends, it is a superior watery delivery system. Use code IDIOTS10 on liquiddeath.com and you will get 2 free koozies with your order. Are you ready for the next story? Big man.
I am, but I got to say, just because we are a business and marketplace, the fact that we got Liquid Death as a sponsor and their whole marketing Liquid Death being water or whatever is wonderful to me. Like, I appreciate it so much.
True story. I was a huge fan of Liquid Death and their marketing before we got them as a sponsor. Interesting fact. I was so enthralled by their marketing. I sent the video to Big Man and I said, isn't this hilarious? And 6 months later, we ended up starting a podcast, and 3 months later after that, I, of course, I track down all the stories. I do all the copywriting. I write all the ad reads, all this other stuff. In addition, I got us the sponsor.
And doesn't complain at all, folks.
I never complain. I'm just informing. I'm just reminding everybody who's doing all the heavy lifting here.